everyone, I'm Luke and today we're diving down the tube of Toons to review Batman The Long Halloween Part 1. This is an adaptation of the comic miniseries and graphic novel Batman The Long Halloween and is a two-part movie event being released by Warner Bros. Home Video Animation. And the second film is coming out in a few weeks time, so stay tuned for a trailer breakdown for that movie. But this video is all about part 1 and it's going to be my review of the film, and it's going to be a non-spoiler review, so just in case you've not seen this video yet, it's going to help you decide whether or not you want to check it out. And while I've not seen the second film, I have read the comic, and so I do know how this story is going to unfold, but I will not be spoiling any of that and will not even be spoiling the end of this film, so do not worry. And before we get started, can I just ask you to hit that like button? It really helps out the channel, allows it to be seen by so many more people. So first things first, what is this movie? Well, just to summarise it, on October 31st, a new killer is on the loose, and Batman, Police Detective James Gordon, and District Attorney Harvey Bullock all make a pact to catch this killer and take down Carmine Falcone, the head of Gotham City's underworld. Along the way, they get some help from Catwoman and have to deal with people like the Joker, and we see the holiday killings take place across the holidays: Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas Eve, and New Year's Day. And that's pretty much all I want to tell you about this film. I'll give you a lot of the setup, a lot of the stuff that happens on Halloween night, as well as telling you the time span that the film takes place across. But I don't really want to give you any details on exactly who is killed or any of the clues to sort of help solve this mystery that's going to be unravelled across this and the next film. Although I will say, stick around till the very end, because there is a post-credit scene that does help set up part 2. What were my initial thoughts? Well, I loved this film. I thought it was really well done. This comic gets a lot of praise. It's always listed up there as being one of the better Batman comics. And while I did enjoy the comic, it certainly is not one of my favourite Batman tales, but this film I do think improved on it in many ways. I just love the feel of this film. It's sort of the perfect blend between the dark and gritty Batman and maybe some of the more super aspects of the Caped Crusader and Gotham City as a whole. Like, he's a superhero that fights supervillains, and this film does embrace both sides of the character, and it blends them together in a truly remarkable way that I don't think we get to see very often. I do get a lot of Batman the Animated Series vibes from it, which is largely considered to be the definitive take on the Batman character, so that's definitely a good thing that we see those similarities here. Oh, it is so hot. I am filming this in the middle of a heat wave. I have to close the window so you can't hear the traffic. I have to turn the fan off. And I've got the studio lights on me. I am practically melted. But let's get through filming this as fast as possible. I really loved all the different characters in these films. I feel like a lot of the characters were boiled down to their essence. They just feel like the classic version of Batman, the classic version of Catwoman, the classic version of Joker. While still being distinct, they don't really feel like just straight up like rip-offs or copies of other versions of the characters, but they just seem to take all these different aspects and combine them into this one take where you just look at it and it's like, yeah, that is the character. How can that not be the character? And being that this is seemingly part of the new animated DC movie universe, I'm very excited to see these versions of the characters going forward. And I would also like to highlight some of the work from the voice actors. Jensen Ackles, this is not his first DC animated film, but it is, I think, the first time he's been voicing Batman, and he does a phenomenal job. He's a brilliant Batman. I talked in my trailer breakdown how I was excited to see Alistair Duncan back as Alfred. He, of course, voiced him in the Batman 2004 series, and he did not disappoint. I was over the moon to see him return here as such a great version of the character. Troy Baker is back as the Joker. It's not his first time voicing him. He voiced him famously in Batman Arkham Origins, and I think maybe in a few other instances, where in that game he was playing the young version of the Mark Hamill Joker from the Arkham Asylum games, and as such his voice is very similar to the Mark Hamill Joker. Of course, Mark Hamill is the definitive take on the Joker, from everything from the original DC animated universe to the Arkham games to a bunch of other movies. He's fantastic, and Troy Baker sounds almost exactly like him, but at the same time never feeling like he's just doing a simple impersonation. He is as good as Mark Hamill, in my opinion, and he is fantastic here. He just sounds like the Joker in a really chilling way, and it is fantastic, and it works perfectly well for the story they are telling in this film. And Naya Rivera as Catwoman, she is fantastic. She's the perfect blend of the femme fatale. Is she Batman's ally or enemy? She's really able to walk the line between the two in her dialogue, and I feel like she embodies the spirit of many different takes of Catwoman over the years, and I think she is the perfect voice for Catwoman. and it's a performance that is ever the more bittersweet in that we know that this and the next film, part 2, will be the only time she ever gets to voice the character, as she sadly died last year when she drowned in a lake. Please don't swim in lakes when it's not safe to do so. That was a horrific tragedy. So this is such a classic Batman story. So how different was it to the original comic? Is it a straight ahead adaptation panel to panel? No, not quite, but there are a lot of similarities. But one thing I will point out is this film actually only adapted the first 4 issues of the comic, and it's actually a 13-issue miniseries. So this is less than half of the original story in just part 1. So there's definitely a lot to fit in part 2. So I do feel like even though this film, part 1, was very close to that original comic, I feel like as we get into the second half of the story in part 2, I feel like they are going to have to make quite considerable amounts of changes to fit the remaining 9 issues into what I presume is a very similar runtime as this movie. And I do think just adapting those first 4 issues works well in this film's favour. I think the New Year's Eve, it definitely marks a turning point in the original comic in the story, and it is a good cut-off point, and they were able to build towards, of course, the final climax of this film. It is original to this film. It was just to make this film feel a little bit more independent and stand on its own. There are certain events that did not actually happen in the comic, but it just helps make this film a lot more satisfying when you watch it on its own without part 2, but at the same time without detracting from the overall story. Now, there were a few other changes, certain line deliveries that were certainly interesting, and while I can't say they weren't in the original comic, after all, it's up to the reader how they read a character's line. It certainly stood out to me as being an interesting choice, and one that maybe helps the viewer work things out a little bit more easily. It maybe makes certain characters seem a little bit more suspicious. Now, like I said, this is a non-spoiler review, so I don't really want to say which characters I think appear more suspicious and throw more suspicion onto that character if you don't know how the story ends. And like I said, I can't say for sure that it wasn't in the original comic, but it definitely stood out a lot more to me that a certain character was acting way more suspiciously in this film than I ever read them in the comic. And then also a certain character's fate coming out of this film seems to differ greatly from their fate in the original comic, and it makes me question how certain story elements are going to unfold in the second part, because there's just certain things where I'm just like, well, that can't happen now because they made this change. And I don't know, it's hard to explain without trying to spoil it, but like certain things happened that basically mean the rest of the story is probably going to have to change. Now, despite me saying there are these changes, overall it is very true to the original comic, and it is a fairly faithful adaptation of those first 4 issues. The little changes that they did make, I do think are maybe going to affect the story going forward, and I do expect part 2 to maybe differ quite a bit. I'm going to be intrigued to see whether the second film is going to be set over the remaining 8 months that the story is set over, or whether it's going to choose to condense it. Now, this is always a possibility, and I and a lot of other people have said that while this comic is quite good and it sets up a good mystery, the ending of the comic was always a little maybe dissatisfying for me. It started to feel like it was dragging in some of the later issues, so it's quite possible that the film is deciding to do away with certain things in those later issues and condense it and make maybe a more satisfying conclusion to what is quite an intriguing mystery. I don't know, we're going to have to see, but I do think it was interesting what they did here. And while on the topic of them adapting the first 4 issues, I do feel like you can feel that when watching the film. In the comic book format, like the 4 issues being set on 4 different dates of the year is fine. It definitely works well within that medium because each issue you can read standalone or you can read as part of the larger graphic novel. But when you are watching a film, you are always going to be watching them successively back to back. And I do think at points the film does feel a little episodic maybe. It does almost feel like you are watching 4 episodes of a Batman series smushed together. And well, yes, a heavily serialized Batman series because it's the same overall overarching mystery. There are 4 very distinct dates in the film. There are 4 very distinct events that happen that you can tell that, oh, that was Halloween. Oh, no, this is Thanksgiving. Oh, this is Christmas. Oh, this is New Year's. Because because, well, a month has just passed almost, and different events happen on each night, if that makes sense. It's not a super big negative, but it's definitely something that's interesting to note. I do think something that works in the film's favour, though, is that both Christmas and New Year does have Batman dealing with the Joker, and the fact that he goes across those two holidays, and of course the holidays are only really a week apart. I think that does help maybe the second half of the film feel a little bit more unified, but make no mistake, it does still feel like 2 episodes, maybe just a 2-part Joker episode. I don't really know how to explain it. Is this necessarily a bad thing? No, I mean, I love series, I love Batman animated series, and so to say, oh hey, I just watched 4 episodes of a really cool Batman show, that's fine. But it does make this film feel less cinematic, which is unfortunate because I do think they wanted this to feel like 2 distinct films, hence why they sort of builded towards some sort of climax towards the end of part 1. But I'm going to leave that one up to you to decide whether or not it is good or bad. Lastly, one thing I do want to touch on, and it's not so much about this film itself as it is more about the original comic, because we've been mentioning the comic a lot in this review. And I do just want to say this comic is written by JEPH LOEB, who is, to be quite honest, not a creator that I really want to promote. I want to make it clear this video is not an endorsement for this comic or the creator. I'm not telling you to go out there and buy this comic, because I do think JEPH LOEB is quite a problematic creator. And while he's known for quite a lot of seminal work in the early days of his career, a lot of his later stuff is just terrible. Seriously, what was this, JEPH LOEB? What was this? And when he moved into the realm of TV production and overseeing the Marvel television shows, whether it be animation or live action, he's been known to have said some incredibly racist things and outright discriminated against actors and characters within the shows he produces. Daredevil, as it was getting into its 2nd season, was choosing to focus on the Hand storyline, and this is something that would also be seen on the Iron Fist show, as well as the Defenders team-up show. Many people agree that across all the Marvel Netflix things, that the Hand storyline was probably the worst one that they ever handled, as he actively told the writer's room not to write for the characters Nobu and Gao, citing that nobody cares about Asian and Chinese people, which of course could not be further from the truth, and it's incredibly problematic for a TV show who's chosen to make Asian characters the primary villains of that season. It was not only an incredibly immoral and unethical thing to do, not to mention being an incredibly dumb business decision that negatively impacted the shows involved. This of course is incredibly problematic, and JEPH LOEB is not a person I can endorse in good conscience. That being said, I am reviewing a film that is based on his works. I did look it up, I wasn't able to find whether or not he was actually involved in the making of this film. He does have a writing credit on the film, but being only in that the film was adapted from a work he made. He isn't one of the writers of the actual film, but I don't think purchasing the film does benefit him. That being said, if you were to purchase the book, the graphic novel written by him, he would of course profit from that. And that's why I'm asking you, please do not go out and search for this book, do not buy it, and do not give him profit. I don't really want him to be profiting off his work. That being said, if you are really intrigued, if you've seen the film and you wanted to read the original comic, there are ways to do so. For instance, you can buy second hand. That's what I did. This is a relatively new purchase for me, but I bought it second hand, and that way you aren't helping out the creator in any way, shape or form, but you are still legally buying the book. You're not doing anything dodgy. If you want to read this book, fine, fair enough, but please do acknowledge that it is written by someone who is incredibly problematic. In terms of the comic book itself, as beloved as it is, when I read it, I was a little disappointed. I don't know whether the book had been hyped up so much in the past. While I do think it sets up a very good mystery, as this film part 1 shows, I do think the ending was ultimately incredibly disappointing, and I just came away from the book being like, was that it? A lot of this story did help inspire the Dark Knight trilogy, and it apparently is also a big influence on Matt Reeves' upcoming The Batman starring Robert Pattinson. So I definitely understand if you are interested in this comic, but I've got to say it may not actually be worth it, because I just don't think the ending was incredibly satisfying. And that's pretty much it. Do I recommend this film? Well, yes, if you like Batman animation, if you like watching different Batman films, I think this is definitely one of the better ones. I definitely think it's going to be something you're going to enjoy. If you do want to check out the film, there's actually a link down below to where you can purchase it on Amazon. So if you were already considering buying it, if you use the affiliate links down below, you can actually help out the channel without any extra cost to yourself. And that's pretty much it. Can I just remind you again to hit that like button if you haven't already done so, So that was the non-spoiler review. There are some spoilery things I do want to talk about, and I will be doing a spoiler review, but not for this film alone. No, because part 2 is coming out in a few weeks' time, so I'm going to be doing a trailer breakdown for that film, and then I will do a non-spoiler review for that film, and then I want to do a spoiler review discussion type thing on the two films together as one video, because otherwise it's so many videos all on these films, and I think maybe just a little bit too much. So if you've already seen this film and you do want to hear some of my thoughts and some of the revelations throughout this film, well, just you wait, because I am going to be doing a spoiler discussion on both parts 1 and 2 together. So if you want to keep a lookout for that one, and you hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell to be notified the next time we dive down the tube of tunes. Alright everyone, thanks for watching. Cheers. Thanks for watching Tube of Tunes. If you want more from the channel, hit subscribe. If you want to keep up to date with what's going on, follow us on our socials. Hope you liked it. Cheers.